There's trouble in Iraq, again. This time the problems relate to the so-called ISIL. It's a direct legacy of Western policy in that region, more specifically the illegal invasion of that country by George W. Bush and Tony Blair, as well as other Western activity in Syria. Amazingly, far from taking responsibility, Western leaders seem to be blaming the victims. American President Obama avoids the fact his presidential predecessor ordered the invasion that created this chaos and instability. As a result, militants are fighting for control of Iraq cities, using mortars and rockets and other arms indirectly seized from American hands. So, how do the American people feel about that? Who do they blame for the current crisis? And how do they think those responsible should be made accountable for the situation? These are the simple questions we sought to answer. And we began by asking the American public what they thought the motives were for the original invasion in 2003 and what effect that war had had on Iraq itself. Here's what they said.
My opinion was it was partly an aftermath of 9/11, but I had a feeling that it had to do somewhat with Saddam Hussein trying to kill George Bush's father around the time of Kuwait and Desert Storm.
They invaded because of 9/11, I believe. Not positive. And I don't even know who the president was at the time.
The war destroyed the country. It's no longer there. The administration said we went in to go see, get weapons of mass destruction, which apparently didn't exist. So I really don't know why we went to war.
Honestly, we probably invaded for oil, mostly, under the guise of terrorism. What it did to the country is it really tore apart their social structure and their government and caused complete collapse, which then we said we were rebuilding it. So, and we didn't do a very good job.
They invaded due to security forces saying there were weapons of mass destruction, never found them, and I think it damaged the country, actually.
I think the U.S. invaded for oil because we don't have enough oil.
The reason is because based on intelligence that was given to the President of the United States and that we were under attack through 9/11, the decision was made through various people and the Congress and the Senate to go in and invade the country.
Well, I think it was in one way helping people who were being persecuted there, but it's like a Hatfields and McCoy kind of a scenario where, there's a 1,000-year-old wars amongst peoples that aren't going to be end by a foreign entity coming in to solve it, and I don't think it would ever really be solved.
So mixed and occasionally supportive views from the American public. We turn to our experts for clarification on the actual reasons for the 2003 invasion and the real effects of that invasion on the country.
Well, I think the reason they invaded Iraq is quite clear, and it's not really in debate anymore. It's about oil. I mean, even Alan Greenspan, the ex-head of the Federal Reserve, has said that the war was about oil. I mean, the Americans have wanted to take out Iraq really since the 90s under Bill Clinton, but 9/11 gave them the opportunity to carry out this project, this new American century. So it was about oil. And what did the war do to the country? Well, for a start, it killed, by some estimates, up to 1 million people, created millions of refugees, debilitated and millions more and bereaved millions more. So it completely decimated the country. What it also did, of course, was lead to the proliferation of terrorism, just as the former head of MI5, Dame Elizabeth Manningham Bullis, said it would. She advised Blair that the war on terror would increase terrorism, not reduce it.
The stated reason for the US invading Iraq was, of course, the so-called weapons of mass destruction. The real reason they invaded Iraq was that they wanted to destroy a strong, relatively independent Arab state, and they had what they called the demonstration effect in mind, which was, having destroyed the Ba'athist regime in Iraq, that they would install a pro-Western limited form of democracy, a free market economy, and that this would lead to a transformation of the Middle East, a normalization of Arab-Israeli relations, an acceptance of Israel, an acceptance of the sovereignty of the market and of the suzerainty of the United States. That was the aim. It failed spectacularly. Of course, what they were able to do was to destroy one state, one compact, one way of running Iraq, but they were not able to put anything in its place except through systematically spreading the poison of sectarian division. So that's what they succeeded in doing, as well as, of course, the direct deaths from the invasion and prior to that from the sanctions.
The US invasion of Iraq caused 2 million Iraqi citizens to flee as refugees, another 2 million to become displaced, and 1 million to die. And yet still, the United States refuses to take responsibility for the current crisis. We asked the American public if they agreed.
Yeah, there's a bad issue there. I mean, there's a lot of problems there to begin with, but you can't deny responsibility of we brought all that, fighting to their doorstep. I mean, there was a lot of violence there to begin with, but we're bombing areas and there's going to be casualties from that.
The U.S. is a bit responsible because of what's happening right now. I feel like if the U.S. wouldn't have invaded Iraq in the first place, a lot of these issues that they're going through and that probably led to that wouldn't be happening.
I don't think we're really responsible for ISIL or ISIS. But if they do another World Trade Center bombing and they're successful, then I guess I wish we had put in more bazookas and warships and boots on the ground.
We caused a lot of damage in Iraq. There's no doubt about that. Killed a lot of people in Iraq. No doubt about that. Were we welcome there? I don't know.
I'm pretty embarrassed by the way we treated Iraq since getting involved. I mean, we're responsible for it. And having millions of people living in tents in the border between Syria and Iraq is a humanitarian crisis and a shame.
There's no denying responsibility, but freedom comes at a cost. And we had to get rid of a tyrannical dictator who was killing his own people to free them and give them a chance to rebuild their society.
We hold some responsibility because we should have never went the first time.
Well, I think this country's biggest problem with going to war somewhere else is being able to leave as abruptly as they show up. I think those problems could have been solved amongst those people alone if we'd have withdrawn a little quicker than we had.
I think that we're completely at fault because we're a nation that just likes to stick our nose in other people's business and we don't care.
Again, a mixed response to these disturbing human statistics and hints that the American people may not be fully aware of these shocking figures. What's the expert opinion on these facts?
Well, it would be laughable were it not so tragic, because they've broken Iraq into pieces. As you say, there's 2 million refugees have left the country. Most of them ended up in Syria, a country which in turn the US has gone on to try to destabilize, to exploit legitimate grievances inside Syria and to turn that into a violent and sectarian civil war. So it's utterly unfeasible for the United States to deny responsibility for what's taking place in Iraq. Now, what they do say is, some of the hawks say, well, we accept responsibility insofar as we left too early or we made mistakes. Well, it's not a question of making mistakes in the so-called reconstruction or getting out too early. The problem is going in there in the first place. This is what happens with imperialist interventions in the Middle East, in Southeast Asia. It's what happened in Vietnam, it's what happened in Cambodia, it's what happened in Laos. And so the United States should take full responsibility. Taking responsibility means getting rid of the causes for the current crisis, the principal one of which is the US presence throughout the Middle East, and the British presence for that matter.
And so we turn to the central question, that of blame. Who do the United States public hold responsible for the problems, and why?
Definitely the US doesn't need to get involved if it's not any of our business, but we always feel like we need to get involved. You know what I mean?
A lot. to blame goes to the United States because of what we did. And it's really unjust that the actions that we committed, like the Iraqis have to put up with and are being affected by it.
You can blame the United States, but in the end it's the whole international system like the UN, United Nations, that have to do something against problems like this.
The current crisis in Iraq is a long-term threat that is upon America, and who I don't really blame anyone. I expect the President of the United States, when in power, to make sure that our country is protected from all enemies and foes.
Our government, because we're war hungry, we're money hungry. War breeds money. Money breeds government. Government loves money.
I think that we are trying to police the world instead of taking care of our own homeland. And we've caused some issues over there. Don't think we can fix them, don't know the answer to it, but I don't think we should go back.
So it seems that there is some reluctant acceptance that the United States is in some way responsible, but it's not a view put forward with much enthusiasm. So to what extent is it right to blame America, and why? We asked our experts.
There's a threefold blame. First of all, the United States and its allies in invading Iraq, in the way that they destabilized the country and created the conditions for this monstrous barbaric reaction in the form of ISIS or IS, whatever they call themselves, the Daesh. Secondly, and very importantly, is the United States allies inside the region, particularly inside the Persian Gulf. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, in different ways have sponsored different sectarian forces inside the Syrian civil war and then spilling back into Iraq. So there have been legitimate grievances in Iraq, but the Saudis have gone out of their way to sectarianize those grievances. Sunni versus Shia, Arab versus Kurd, and so on, with the Christians and the Yazidis fair game for these head choppers. The head choppers, that is, of IS, not the head choppers of Saudi Arabia. The third force, of course, is Israel. Israel, whose former ambassador until September of last year to the United States, a very senior diplomatic post, Michael Oren, said that he and the Israeli government much preferred to see the emergence in the Arab world of forces like IS rather than democratic forces, democratic national or popular forces, and certainly any force which in Israel's view would be seen to be allied to the independent Islamic Republic of Iran. So all of these forces have conspired. One can add politicians who have poured fuel on the flames inside Iraq itself and have governed for a section of the Iraqi population, or sought to govern for a section, rather than for Iraq as a whole, as a nation state. But this is where the blame lies, and the fundamental cause of all of that is the entire imperialist-dominated setup of the Middle East, which has caused such mayhem and bloodshed for a century.
All this raises a more general consideration about American foreign policy. How much consideration do US administrations give to the effects of the wars which they cause? We put that to the public.
I suppose the obvious question is probably not enough. You know, we go in for a particular reason and then we probably don't think enough about the long-term impact of it. I don't like war, but I do have to admit that at times I think war does have its place and something we sometimes have to enter into. But I don't know that we do enough on the other end, either for the country or for our veterans.
I would say little to none. I think that we go in, like I said, with this idea of spreading democracy, but in terms of if people want that, the people in that country, do they want that? Do they care if they kill a bunch of innocent people? I really don't believe that they do.
I think they give a lot of consideration to it, but I don't think they consider the effects of the lives of the everyday people. You know, my brother-in-law, he's a veteran. and doesn't have a job, and he hasn't had one in 3 years, and it's been tough for the family. So, I don't know. I think they look out for their own interests, which is not the same as mine.
I don't think they care at all about it, as I said before. They also think that's not the consequences of their actions, because they think if they go to a country, they think they help the people or they free them. So
I don't think they give much consideration to it. Honestly, as much as I love this country and this government, they're thinking of their interests first. There's no doubt about that. The Iraqi people and that country second. We wouldn't have done it if there wasn't something in it for us.
I'd like to think that they give it enough, but they probably really don't. They probably just, cause wars, and then they say, oh, we'll help fix the problem, and then they really don't do a lot. Just look at any kind of our healthcare system or government system. Nothing really works for the people very well, so why would it work in a different country? If we can't do it in our country, why would we do it in a different one?
It seems that in the streets of America, there is some worry, but also a willingness to justify American policy when it comes to use of military force. We asked our experts to assess how careful administrations in America are when they commit themselves to war.
Well, in terms of the suffering caused, the victims caused by war, I think they might take it into account, but I don't think that's not going to stop them doing what they want to do. The common denominator in all these interventions is the West's perceived strategic and economic interests. That's the crucial factor. If people have to die, however many thousands or hundreds of thousands or even millions have to die in order for Western imperialism to achieve those aims, then that's a sacrifice imperialism is willing to make. Just look at Bahrain, for example. The West has backed the Bahraini regime and the Saudi regimes in cracking down and crushing the revolutionary uprising in that country. Whereas it claims it wants to help the revolutionaries in Libya. Now, America's not schizophrenic. There is a common thread running through these, and it's what it perceives to be its economic and strategic interests. That's the major driving force for imperialism, not victims, not suffering.
We finished our inquiry with one more somber question. Which country in the last 50 years has killed more people than any other? And how should that country be made accountable? Here's how America's people replied.
It sounds like a loaded question. I have a feeling that the answer is probably the U.S., but I don't know that for sure.
I actually do think it's the U.S. also, but I don't know how to be held accountable for our actions,
America has tried to save people, but we, through our greed for consumer goods, the rainforest, the oceans, and the cheap labor that we do so our products can be bought, we've contributed to a lot of positives and negatives, and a lot of deaths. But I think I'm going to stick with Russia, Union of Soviet Socialist Republics.
Definitely the United States has caused the most death, and I believe that there has to be change. I'm not sure exactly what the people can do to make the change, but I'm not sure how exactly they can be held accountable.
I'm not a world historian. I'm more aware of United States history. I know the United States killed an awful lot of Americans in Vietnam, not to mention the Vietnamese and the Cambodians and the Laotians. Then you go into Central America. How many people will be responsible for deaths in that region? Continues to Colombia, Mexico. Are we responsible for that? Do we take responsibility for our policy on drugs and the harm that causes? It was just a knee-jerk reaction against that segment of our own society, and is deemed unnecessary or maybe, I don't know.
I don't know. It's maybe United States, China, Russia.
Directly responsible? That's a tough one. You could throw us in there too, but the world itself has got to be held responsible.
Wars have been going on since the dawning of the time of civilized countries. America stands for freedom, and any of those folks that have died, America is always there to try to prop those people up.
America, duh. We like to murder. It's kind of our thing. We like to get in wars for no reason, or for reasons of money.
I think it's our country has killed more people than any other country. And again, going to war like it's a Sunday affair doesn't cut it anymore. We have youth that have died or maimed and mentally handicapped because of going to war in other places. And those are a great number in this country. I think the highest rate of suicide in this country is amongst military vets who returned from war in the Middle East.
So the question and the answer did not sit comfortably with the American people. For a final and objective analysis of the death toll and of the question of accountability, we gave the last word to our experts.
Well, I mean, if you're looking at deaths caused by war, by direct interventions, I think there's probably little doubt that it's America. I mean, if you look at, for example, what was it, 6, 7, 8 million killed in Vietnam, 1 million killed in the Second Gulf War, 100,000 or so killed in the First Gulf War, 10,000 killed in Kosovo, 30,000 in Libya. America has a lot of blood on its hands, but it's not only the deaths caused by the direct interventions of America. America also engages in proxy wars. It backs coups, it backs repressive and brutal regimes all over the place. And that will result in many, many more deaths. I mean, America backed Suharto. It used to back Saddam Hussein prior to the First Gulf War. It backed the Contras in Nicaragua. It backs it backs Israel, who, as we know, humiliates and slaughters Palestinians on a regular basis.
Well, you can talk of killing in two different ways. One is the direct killing through military engagement, in which the United States has excelled. There are close runners-up. France managed to kill 1.5 million people in the course of trying to hold on to Algeria to resist the national independence movement. But the United States has killed directly more than anybody else. There's a second way in which people are killed, which is creating the conditions for early death through starvation, through the denial of medicines, the denial of clean water. And the United States stands at the apex of globalized capitalism, a system which ensures that hundreds of thousands of children go every day without sufficient calorific intake, that 25,000 children a day die from the results of malnutrition and from wholly preventable diseases, often borne by unclean water. So when you add all of these things together, it's the United States and the system that it represents at the pinnacle which is responsible for the deaths of most people. And what should be done about it? What should be done is starting to happen around the world, which is the people who are the victims of that policy, the victims of that country and the victims of that system, beginning to see that there's an alternative. There has to be an alternative, one based upon cooperation, not upon profit, one based upon solving matters peacefully rather than through invasion by the Pentagon.
So we go back to where we started. When America invaded Iraq, it caused 2 million of that country's citizens to flee. Another 2 million became displaced, and 1 million died. However uncomfortable that home truth may be for the American people, the fact is that that home truth will not go away by simply being ignored.